That's what I heard, at least. Have to ask a historian. Okay, anyway, this is a case for shame in character education in studies in philosophy and education, requested by Val Poquet. Here we go. And as always, feel free to ask questions. If you have anything you want to ask any old time, just go ahead too. It's fine. Maddie said he also had guards who were much taller than him, which made him look smaller. That's fair. I once actually saw Donald Trump many years ago at the U.S. Open, the U.S. tennis tournament, and Donald Trump isn't a small guy. Like, he's just not. He's fat. He's fucking a fat ass. Like, I'm not, like, I don't mean a body shame, but he is not, like, in any way, like, peak health. Like, he's just a sort of a big dude. His bodyguards, the bodyguards he had, were enormous. And so we're talking about a big dude who is not looking like he's in good shape, and there are these enormous guys next to him. It's like, it was he didn't rally, yeah. But so like, you can, like, compared to those guys, you look small, but basically, you know, bodyguards were gigundous around Donald Trump. And this is like 2013, 2014. This is like before he really got into politics. So, but yeah, he looked terrible back then, but he would just, you know, he walked by us. He actually said excuse me to my dad because he was trying to get around him. Yeah. Anywho. All right. Yeah. And as always, feel free to ask questions or whatever about anything, about paper or not. So let's find out what this is all about. Introduction. There are many reasons to worry about shame in moral development. Shame can be employed for bad ends, such as manipulation and making others feel powerless. Feeling ashamed is often associated with denial and hiding behaviors, as well as mental health issues including social phobia, eating disorders, and anxiety. Also, shame is not a motivation suitable for performing virtuous actions. Is it? I mean, this is interesting. I mean, we should go ask Aris. But you need to have, like, the virtues for performing virtuous actions. But doesn't shame, like, motivate you to become more virtuous? Like, you are not the good person you want to be, and then you would be. This is anti-Catholic. Yes, very much like the Jews and the Catholics. You have all this, like, Jewish guilt and, like, Catholic shame. It's like, come on. Alright, for example, acting generously to resolve one's negative self-directed feelings makes these actions about oneself rather than about the beneficiaries of one's generosity. See, this is a little pushing it. It's like, yeah, you can also do things for other people while you are improving yourself. Being only, like, sort of single-minded about stuff, that's a little bit, I think, narrow. It's like, yeah, if you have some shame, maybe you want to improve yourself and do it by helping other people. Like, and that's what shame is. It's a little selfish, Gene. Yeah, exactly, Maddie. It's like, it's sort of narrowing down. Like, it's a little too narrow, I think, what they're talking about here. But that's fair. I mean, it's just the opening paragraph. This means that even if a caretaker with good intentions employs shame to help a learner build virtuous habits, the learner will eventually need to perform these actions for different, more suitable reasons than avoid feelings of shame. Yeah, but, like, okay, but that's later. Fine. This article argues that, nevertheless, well-ordered shame plays an indispensable and constructive role as part of a mixed methods approach in the development of moral character. Okay, so that was all a setup, because they want to say shame is good, and it will help be something you, like, it may be like a crutch you lean on for a while, and then eventually get rid of. Fine. Shame is a valuable emotion for the kinds of reflections it occasions about the global self, reflections which provide insights into one's motivational profile and patterns of action. Okay, so now we're talking about dispositions. So what are your dispositions, your motivational profile and patterns of action? Additionally, alongside emotions such as emulation and awe, shame is instructive regarding aesthetic dimensions of the moral life, or what the ancients called kalon, fineness or nobility. Without shame, we lack a kind of moral vision or means of seeing certain good actions as good. Moreover, shame supports the development of pro-social awareness and sensitivity to the needs and concerns of others, which is an asset in the moral life. Alright, so now they're saying there are special things you can get out of shame, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, carrot and stick viewpoint, Maddie. Yeah, absolutely. But, like, when you're teaching people things different people sometimes need different sorts of motivations, and there is no one size fits all for like instruction. My grandma was a teacher, and she would say people would always come to her and say, "Oh, we've got this foolproof way to teach kids better." And she'd say, "Really? It's foolproof?" They say, "Oh, yeah." And then she said, "Really? It all works all the time?" She says, "Well, it works 95% of the time." And that's the thing. There is no one way that people learn. And like everyone is at different spots. They need a different thing. It's like people are complicated, even when they're young. So it's like, yeah, carrot and stick might be the thing to do sometimes. This article assesses various reasons why shame has fallen out of favor among Western moral educators and demonstrates why these reasons fall short of providing a compelling case against employing shame in virtue formation. Okay, so we're straight up going for virtue theory here. We got virtue formation. It defends shame's value as an epistemic aid in the moral life and provides a developmental assessment of the role shame plays in advancing a learner towards virtue. Moreover, this article discusses how to mitigate the potential damages of the misuses of shame. Yes, this is one of the things. Yeah, the term foolproof underestimates the ingenuity of fools. Absolutely, Vipers. What's the old quote? You make something foolproof, the universe will make a better fool. It's just how it goes. And believe me, I'm like currently finishing up a paper to send out for a review. And I the way I write papers and I assume them to be like reviewed is I assume that the reviewer is like drunk. And I don't mean like a little buzzed, I mean like hardcore smashed. Is there any possible way that my words could be misinterpreted? They will misinterpret it. Like, you can just do it. It's like, that's the only way that like I can write a philosophy paper, is to make it so airtight that even a drunk philosopher, not a drunk random person, but a drunk philosopher wouldn't make a mistake on it. And even then I fail. Okay, the emotion of shame. In the psychology literature, shame is often described in contrast to guilt. Both are self-conscious emotions, alongside embarrassment and pride. Self-conscious emotions are those which are evoked by self-reflection and self-evaluation. Of this set of emotions, shame in particular has been vilified as of late. Frank Big Time, welcome, and how you doing? I think you can inspire motivation by contrasting positive versus very, very positive incentive, but the very, very positive incentive is expensive, whereas negative versus positive tends to be cheap. Aloha, yes. Yeah, the thing is, it's like, even then, the very, very, very positive stuff, it's like, that, like, it still takes time and effort to do. In certain situations, you're not gonna have like that amount of like time and effort to like expend on like teaching one person in like the way you think is the right way, the very, very expensive way. Sometimes you're always gonna be doing a trade-off, and so it's like you're always gonna be in a situation where there's probably a slightly better way, but you only have so much time and resources. So it's like, absolutely. Viper says, all I know about shame is that you shouldn't fat shame people. No, it's bad to fat shame. They already have enough on their plate, you motherfucker. Yeah, it's like, no, and you try to realize that people's situations are difficult. Like, fat shaming is not worth it. Like, it's, so what if they like should lose a few pounds, don't need to lose a few pounds, they may be like, it may just be big bones, like whatever, it's fine, don't fat shame, like people are okay. But it's like, yeah, I gave Donald Trump some crap earlier, but like that guy probably deserves it. But yeah, it's like, you don't know people's situations, and so it's like you have to give people a benefit of the doubt most of the time for like stupid things that you look at them for. It's completely like that's not what's worth giving people crap over. But anyway, okay. Sedige Mornani writes that shame is often discussed with a reluctance because of the negative feelings that accompany it. Yeah, exactly, Maddie. Things that are outside their control, like, you know, people just have medical problems, and like they're taking a medication makes them gain weight very, very quickly. It's like, that's not their fault, it's a medication. Yeah, the whole DFW this is water spiel. Yeah, so it's like, I don't want to get into that because everyone knows that at this point too. It's like not an interesting topic. But then again, we're talking about shame here, and like this actually gets right to the sort of immediate thing of like fat shaming, or like, you know, whatever shaming you're using. So like small hand shaming when it comes to Donald Trump. We should just go for that one, because it seems like he might be the only person that cares. Okay. But like, this is the thing. You've got negative feelings that accompany shame. But that's the whole point. You need to have negative feelings to get motivated sometimes, because you don't know that you're being a jerk. Sometimes you need to feel shame. You need to be ashamed because, like, say you were being racist. You should feel shame about being racist. Like we were discussing very briefly earlier, Philosopher did something stupid 26 years ago, and he completely repudiates it. He felt shame, he made himself better, and now he's getting crap for it now. It's like, well, why are we giving him crap for it now? He did all the things he needed to do to make himself better and to like make the world better. So, and now you're giving him crap for it because why? It makes you feel good? Who cares about like what like other people want to feel? It's like just they're making themselves feel good for giving him crap. But he already did that. He did what he needed to do to get better. All right, whatever. Psychologist J.P. Tangney notes that American society has become shame-phobic, opting to use the word guilt when they mean they felt shame, guilt, or some combination of the two. And philosopher Christian Christensen, God, sorry about how I pronounce everyone's names, I feel very ashamed about that, notes that in its mainstream interpretation, shame is considered expendable and ugly emotion and guilt's ugly sister. But why exactly is this? The author asks. For starters, shame is an emotion that is painful and perhaps even more painful than guilt. Both guilt and shame have negative emotional valences, meaning they characteristically involve negative affective states. But unlike guilt, shame is often described as a very painful, often devastating experience characterized by feeling trapped and overwhelmed. I mean, really? I mean, okay, like you're gonna feel trapped and overwhelmed by your shame? Like, I've fucked things up bad before. I have. You just gotta give yourself a little bit of time, but alright. Shame is also associated with numerous mental health ailments, including anxiety, depression, social phobia, and eating disorders, and its effects can be long-lasting. Psychologists have identified a trait of shame resulting from experiences of the emotion that crystallize long-term into features of a person's character. The trait of shame is classified as a persisting set of dispositions towards feelings of inferiority, despair, helplessness, and the eagerness to hide personal flaws. Okay. Now I'm starting to get where they're going with this. This is the modern problem of like social media. You see all the best things about other people on social media, and then you are stuck with all your own problems, and like you feel like you have not like lived up to like the potential that like you want to live up to because you're seeing all these other things. This is, I think, a separate problem. This may be amplifying shame, but I don't think like shame on its own is like gonna crush people. I think we've got a bigger problem in our society than just shame. All right, excuse me. Yet in the classical tradition, this shame emotion, widely perceived as painful and problematic today, is regarded as valuable in the process of character development. Notably, the idea that shame is a salient emotion in moral development is rooted in Aristotle. Aristotle describes shame as a painful emotion connected to modesty. A modest person is neither excessive in shame, taking alarm at everything, nor deficient in shame, abashed at nothing whatsoever. Okay, so they're using Aris is using shame as it's funny, I'm referring to Aristotle as Aris because that's how we refer to my buddy the philosopher, the Twitch streamer Aristotle. So this is sort of like a you don't want to be over-shamed and under-shamed. You want to just not be afraid of everything, but nor do you want to be shameless. For Aristotle, modesty is not a virtue, and this is primarily because shame is only suitable for the unvirtuous. The virtuous are motivated by what is noble rather than by the opinions of the many or by a fear of shame. Regardless, for Aristotle, the path to virtue depends on shame. Shame constrains bad deeds, such as a learner is inclined to develop good habits instead, and it helps a learner to internalize moral norms, bringing concepts of good and bad, right and wrong, to bear on one's own actions. No, you don't know about that? What do you don't know about? It sounds very good or bad. Well, we're going into the Aristotle theory here, Maddie. Aristotle is like the guy who made virtue theories. So the idea that like there's some disposition in you that like can motivate you to be noble, well, maybe shame is part of that. That you say, look, I want to be more noble because I don't like these parts of myself, and you feel shame about them. Yeah, see, this is what next sentence. Moreover, shame motivates love of the noble or fine by drawing attention to what is not Kalon, so what is not shameful. So I describe this process below, building on the work of Jimenez and Christensen. So this is the thing. How do you actually know what's good? Well, you could say, well, you feel shame, and you should... Feeling shame is a good thing in this case because that tells you what's bad. And so you can work towards something that does not feel shameful. Okay. Recently, several attempts have been made to clarify the nature of shame and to distinguish shame from guilt. In the mid-20th century, cultural anthropologist E.R. Dodds made a distinction between shame and guilt societies, a distinction which is still popular currency today. Maddie says, it also feels like different people or cultures can have different concepts on that as well. Oh, absolutely. This is one of the problems with virtue ethics in general, is that it is not... it's sort of culturally relative. It's also relative to a person. You can always abuse virtue ethics because someone who feels no shame is just inherently like shameless. Like, you can tell them that they should feel shame, and like they might be considered defective by Aristotle, but if they're like a person, you say, well, like, this is just what I don't feel shame about, and so it sort of licenses them to have bad behavior because they say, well, I don't feel shame about this, and maybe your shame is wrong, my shame is correct, and that just sort of licenses bad behavior on them. Maddie says, I don't know Dodd by name, but I definitely went over these moral versus shame concepts in your anthrop class. Okay, yeah, so still popular currency today. Good to know that it is, if they say that in the thing, you can confirm. That's good. In shame societies, moral norms are held externally among the people, and motivations for actions include reputation, honor, and a fear of losing face. In guilt cultures, moral norms are internal constraints, and a dominant motivation for the action is the desire for a clear conscience. Okay, so we've got this clear conscience versus like honor, like social honor versus conscience. So we've got, the Catholic or Jewish guilt, so you need to have a clear conscience and act that, versus one where you're trying to save face in society. Shame involves external norms reinforced within groups, whereas guilt involves internal sanctions. Theologian Jennifer Hurt points out that while this distinction is still popular, both shame and guilt involve internalized norms, and in societies in which guarding one's honor is a central concern, the preoccupation is both with one's reputation in the eyes of others and with one's own self-image and assessment. Yeah, there's going to definitely be both, Maddie. It's just, this is the distinction to how you understand the difference between the external social stuff and the internal norms that you are just acting by. Okay, stated differently, this distinction is unhelpful insofar as moral norms are not wholly internal or external, and societies are neither entirely guilt nor entirely shame cultures. Yeah. I have two additional remarks on the shame-guilt culture distinction. First, regardless of whether this distinction offers clarity on the nature of these two emotions, it is descriptively true that certain societies are more attentive to considerations of moral beauty and are more honor-loving than others. For example, the contemporary Western world is less concerned with honor in general than Japanese samurai culture. Regardless of whether the shame and guilt culture distinction offers analytic clarity on the nature of shame, it is still valuable to track which societies are more motivated by honor, reputation, and external sanctions on character, and to ask what the repercussions of these differences are in the development of virtue. All other things being equal, it can be valuable to explore whether greater social reliance on shame supports acting well and for developing fitting motivations for good actions. This can offer insight to character educationists about whether and how shame should be employed, avoided, or mitigated in early education. Yeah, so here we go. Now we're starting to finally see where this is going. Like, how do you actually employ this when you're teaching kids? Are you going to say, look, you're going to fail in the eyes of your friends, or are you going to fail because you didn't live up to your standards? A second remark is that external sanctions are often a substantial pedagogical means by which learners develop guilt and form internal sanctions. Over the years, several prominent developmental psychologists have defended views along these lines. For example, Erik Erikson described an early stage of childhood involving a learner's growing autonomy as she navigates rules and social conventions introduced through discipline and shame. This stage is immediately followed by a period marked by guilt, wherein a child becomes concerned whether her actions and desires are good ones. Likewise, Piaget described morality as being learned by heteronymous imposition, and that subsequently learners critically assume these norms for themselves. And Kohlberg described a stage of internalized moral norms following a period in which learners submit to the standards of others, motivated by a desire for approval. Their common opinion was that moral norms are learned through external sanctions, which form one's self-understanding. The point is, there is precedent for recognizing a developmental sequence between these two emotions. In the final section of this article, I will argue for and assess the nature of such a connection. The idea that external sanctions are often a significant pedagogical means by which learners form internal sanctions also seemed to be Aristotle's stance on how shame prepares a learner in preparation of virtue. With the help of praise and blame, children develop good habits. Yeah, see, there's praise and blame. Is there praise? Is blame the opposite of praise? I don't think so. Like, criticism may be the opposite of praise. So, okay, that's not anything. So I'm not entirely sure, like, this is what they want here. They praising criticism and children develop good habits. Is it really, blame? So, yeah, Maddie, it's like, this is what happens in philosophy. Like, just in general, if you're looking at stuff, people shift meanings on words, and they slip in different words sometimes because what they're saying isn't exactly right, but they don't want to go into the details, or they don't actually want to say it isn't exactly right. But this is one of these little slippery spots where they started to they slipped the meaning here. They just sort of shifted. Okay. Jimenez points out that for Aristotle, shame not only prompts learners to perform right actions through painful habituation, but makes them perform them in the right spirit through motivating love of the noble and truly pleasant by engaging learners at increasingly advanced cognitive levels. The idea is that shame has a role in forming one's motivations for actions by helping a learner to love the right things. Shame thus shapes one's internal norms, and these norms become socially independent. Yeah, so you're getting the external restrictions internalized. For Aristotle, shame fills a lacuna in the process of moral development. He describes moral virtues as being acquired by doing or by repeated practice. But learners are not blank slates. They have natural dispositions in place that may incline them to perform actions that compete with virtuous practice. So how does this process begin? This is a process of initiation. How to motivate an agent to dishabituate, endorse, or redirect natural tendencies to habituate good ones in their place. Shame as a motivation for dishabituating bad actions can initiate this process and fill this lacuna. I guess, this is a rehabilitation program now, so you need something internal to motivate someone to change, and they're saying shame can do that. Okay. As such, blame is more of a judicial thing. Yeah, that's right. I was trying to why were they saying blame there? But they mean to get the blame internalized, and they didn't say that correctly. But I don't think it's going to hurt the paper. It's just one time they got a little sloppy with their words, and that happens all the time in philosophy. I do it. Everyone does it. Okay. As such, shame can be conceived as an emotional training wheels for virtue. It facilitates the process of virtue acquisition and then becomes unnecessary through virtuous practice. Yeah, Maddie says, but if someone is guilty of something, shaming them doesn't help much with rehabilitation and teaching better choices. Yes, here's the thing. They have to learn why or what the harm was, I guess, to understand the harm, and that way they might feel the shame. They're not going to just being guilty, of course, does not teach anyone anything. Because people saying, well, you're wrong, and we'll say, you're wrong, I'm not wrong, you're wrong. It's well, okay. But you're right. See, this is the question. How do you actually rehabilitate people and rehabilitate people? And this is the theory here. It's the shame as an emotional training wheels for virtue. Is it? I don't know. But that's what they're claiming. All right, and that's what Aristotle, I guess, thought. A second emotion that Aristotle describes as playing this early role is emulation. Emulation inclines a learner to perform good actions, but the virtuous person is not emulous. Maddie says it's partly why we have a judicial system that, on theory, takes out shame and negative emotions constructing during the system, and emotional constructs during the system working. Yeah, I mean, you can't actually get people to feel shame about stuff. Like, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. You can show someone the harm they've done, you can't make them feel bad about it. And so you can't put that part into the judicial system. It's like, yeah, you can only, it's not like the function of the courts to make someone feel bad. Like, how would that work? Okay. Yeah, a virtuous person is not emulous. You're not emulating virtue, you have to just have the virtue. Author says, rather he ceases to be other directed in performing good actions and does them of his own volition. Yeah. Both emotions initiate virtuous practice, then fall away in mature virtue. And they need to fall away because neither emotion is a suitable motivation for virtue. Aristotle describes virtuous action as being motivated by kalon, rather than by reputation, pro-social comparison, or social sanctions. Yeah, you need to somehow have an internal reason to do it, whatever it is, as that aren't one of these sort of other things. Vipers says, yeah, I don't buy it. We don't suffer from insomnia because we're up at 3 a.m. thinking about that time we were praised for being virtuous. We think about that embarrassing thing we did when we were 15. We were 15 in front of people we'll never see again. Yeah. See, that's the problem with a lot of the teaching theory in terms of like how do you actually teach people to get virtuous. And so it's like, does this actually work? I don't know. But like, this is what people say. And so it's like, I don't have any kids. My brother has a kid. He's 1 year old. And so like, I've not had any experience looking at a little kid grow up. I'm not in any education of like little kids. So does this actually work? And I'm trying to think back to when I was an idiot and younger and I felt bad about things later, and did I get better? You know what? I'm kind of with you on this, Vipers. I don't think that's what did it. I was work on stuff. I realized I was being stupid. I changed it, but it wasn't like it was the shame at the time. The shame at the time felt bad, but I didn't know how to fix it either. And so it took more work on me afterwards. And then I was able to be a better person, I guess, after the fact. But like, maybe I could look back and be like, I was being an idiot back then. But that's not actually what changed anything. So yeah, I'm not. I don't know if my history fits with the story being told here either. I don't know. But again, what else are we to do? Like, you have to at least know what you did was wrong, and you have to feel what you did was wrong, else you're just gonna forget about it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's like historical things. Like, how do they actually work, or is this my hindsight is 2020 sort of thing? I don't know. Okay. A caveat about employing shame in early development is that it is important that caretakers know what is indeed shameful. Otherwise, learners will internalize norms that mislead them. Hello, religion. In section The Case Against Shame, I address the ways in which shame can, and often does, morally misdirect learners, both in terms of misdirection by authority figures and in terms of the kinds of actions shame dissuades. Shame impacts more actions than just moral ones, such as etiquette and non-normative personal qualities. In any case, shame as a public emotion versus guilt as a private emotion, tracking the guilt versus shame culture distinction has been largely forfeited among emotion theorists. The dominant contemporary accounts of guilt and shame focus on the evaluation or construal of each emotion. Helen Block Lewis writes, the experience of shame is directly about the self, which is the object of evaluation. In guilt, the self is not the central object of negative evaluation, but rather the thing done or undone is the focus. In guilt, the self is negatively evaluated in connection with something, but is not itself the focus of the experience. Shame says, I did that terrible thing, whereas guilt says, I did that terrible thing. Okay, so shame has the emphasis on I, versus in guilt, it's that thing I did was terrible, not that I did the thing. Okay, so shame involves a negative global self-evaluation and guilt does not. So it's like what exactly? Like, are you a bad person and you feel shame? Or guilt is where that thing you did was shameful, or was bad. I mean, that's a real fine distinction. Like, okay, but like, seriously, I don't think any kid is getting that exactly. And you can always say, look, I'm not criticizing you, I'm saying that thing you're doing is bad, but that sounds like massively hypocritical, because that's always like, was it like not hating the sinner, I'm hating the sin? It's like, this is one of those, like, people are full of shit. It's like when they say that stuff a lot of times. So, okay. Citing the empirical work of Baumeister et al., Tagney, Lindsay Hartz et al., and other philosophers, Christian Miller records that by focusing on the self, shame impedes empathetic feelings, whereas guilt typically has the opposite effect. Furthermore, guilt is often accompanied by corrective emotions such as remorse and regret, and actions such as confession, apology, and repair. Conversely, shame invokes feelings of powerlessness, being small and being worthless, and it provokes the shamed person to retreat, escape, or even strike back, rather than to deal with the situation suitably. I mean, is this experimental philosophy? Where'd they actually get this sort of stuff? And what's interesting here is 1994, 1995, and 1995 references here. Those are prior to experimental philosophy. Like, experimental philosophy, as we were reading last week, was like, it took off like a little later. And so the idea that like you actually have good data off of this for philosophical work, that seems weird. Okay. Viper says, I know I wouldn't feel shame for finishing my paper on shame with something like, in conclusion, shame doesn't make you virtuous, it makes you kinky. Tune in for my next time for much more salacious paper. Yeah, I mean, that would be a good end to a paper. That'd be probably the best end to a paper. That'd be a happy ending to a paper. It really would be. Yeah, see, I just don't... This paragraph right here scares me, that people would make these claims, because it just doesn't seem like they had this sort of... couldn't possibly be philosophers looking at philosophical data. They'd be looking at psychological data they had to interpret. And so this just can't be like the right sort of... Maybe the psychologists were doing the right sort of stuff. I don't know, but I'd have to go look at what actually got done in 1994, which doesn't seem like it likely is the right sort of stuff. Anyhow, continuing. There are two important notes about these empirical attributions. First, Heidi Maybaum notes that Tagney defines shame in terms of its tendency to lead to retreat, and guilt in terms of its tendency towards reconciliation. Thus, when Tagney finds that guilt but not shame is useful, this is unsurprising and only trivially true. Okay, so the author here knows that this is bullshit and calling them out. Yeah, because they just find it as that way. So the author is going to say, hey, you can't actually use this stuff, because they define it in the way that they're trying to prove. A second observation about these findings is offered by Christiansen. He notes that much of the contemporary empirical treatment of shame concerns excessive rather than moderate or well-ordered forms of the emotion. Yeah, I mean, that's what psychologists do. They're looking for the disorders, not the regular ones quite often. One may concede that excessive, misplaced, or misdirected instances of shame are damaging in the way is described. However, there are moderate, healthy forms of the emotion too. These do not appear to be represented in the data. Perhaps it is because the experiments performed are often self-report. Study participants are asked to recount experiences of shame. This may incline participants to select particularly painful experiences of shame because these experiences are often the most memorable. Yeah, I fucked something up a few weeks ago. I feel bad about it, maybe a little bit of shame. It's like, yes. Am I crushed because of this? No. Will I have to do some work, maybe repairing some friendships? Yeah, maybe. A little bit. But these are old friends. They'll probably forgive me. If they don't, then they're being dickheads. But it's like, so what? Like, so what? So what? I fucked up. It's gonna happen in the past. It's gonna happen in the future. It's like, do I feel shame about it? Yeah, a little bit. But like, that's more. I think that's more normal. So. Okay. However, it seems that many, if not most, instances of shame are moderate and involve less severe repercussions. Consider Rosalind Hursthouse's example of a young child who takes food from a cat's dish. A parent responds, "You don't want to eat that dirty, nasty thing." Dan Russell explains, obviously the child does want the thing, but of course the statement is a prescriptive one. We say things like that to children both to teach them not to want that sort of thing, and also that the nasty and dirty is such as to be undesirable and bad. In this case, a child is shamed for eating cat food, and this is not by any means an unsuitable or outsized reaction by the parent. The parent draws lines in the sand, and the child thereafter knows that the cat food is not people food. The child's identity is unlikely to be threatened here in the way that Lewis and her successors describe, or to feel worthless because of the exchange. Moreover, emotions do not occur in a vacuum. One might imagine even a difficult instance of shame occurring in a loving, secure context. Feelings of worthlessness are mitigated in these situations because the shamed person's identity is secure. And this is part of the thing. Like, how bad do you feel about any one thing is going to be more showing what your psychology is like overall than just, one-off things that like, oh, I feel bad. Viper says, oh, here's an interesting definition from the European Journal of Social Psychology. Embarrassment results from violating one's particular persona. Shame results from violating a shared objective ideal. Okay, so the interesting thing here is that they're doing the social shame thing, like you're violating your honor. That's the objective ideal, is to have honor. So shame results is like losing face, losing your honor. So that's the same sort of guilt. Guilt is what was it? Not the guilt, but it was the public thing versus the internal thing. So shame results, but embarrassment is from violating one's particular persona. So that's like being hypocritical. That's fine. Actually, that is kind of interesting. So like you're embarrassed because you are being a hypocrite and you're not standing up to your own like particular standards. But shame is like more public, where it's like social. It's a socially as they say, objective ideal. I don't know if it's objective, but it would be culturally determined ideal. So yeah, that's interesting though. That I wonder if they'll mention embarrassment in this paper, because that does seem like a very related concept. Yeah. The idea that excessive forms of certain emotions can be harmful or maladaptive is not new. Okay, so we got the APA Dictionary of Psychology definition. A highly unpleasant self-conscious emotion arising from the sense of there being something dishonorable, immodest, or indecorous in one's own conduct or circumstances. Yeah, so is that embarrassment? Yeah. I mean, that's fine. You have to keep in mind also that there is a little bit of over-medicalization in what I think of in psychology. So, that's shame. Okay. Yeah, so that's a highly unpleasant self-conscious emotion arising from the sense that there's being something dishonorable, immodest. Yeah, see, and dishonorable, immodest, or indecorous these are public terms. These are not like saying you felt bad about yourself by your own internal standards, but like immodesty might be, but like dishonorable, again, honor is a public thing. You have honor in front of other people. Maybe not you don't like worry about your honor in front of yourself. Okay, so this is again with the public definitions of it. But like I said, you have to be careful, like using the psychology. Like sometimes psychology can be over medicalization of things. They'll say things are, this could be a problem if people are feeling that bad about it. But like sometimes it's just, as the author is here saying, it's normal. There's a normal range too. And the psychology is like, well, certain things for some people might be normal range. For other people, it might be a disorder. So you have to be careful about like exactly how, what counts as a disorder in psychology. Because some people might be like, it's okay for them. Other people, it might be going into the harmful area. Yeah. The idea that excessive forms of certain emotions can be harmful or maladaptive is not new. Other examples of immoderate emotions gone awry include excessive anger, which can result in hypertension, and excessive empathy. An example of excessive empathy is provided by Paul Bloom. He describes a person he calls Hannah. Hannah is so empathetic she is in a constant state of hyperarousal. She is so moved by the feelings of others that many of her relationships involve asymmetrical care, and she carries too much emotional weight that she can barely function in her daily tasks. Bloom writes that moderate forms of empathy, like anger, offer important feedback about the world around us and foster social connections, but being driven too much by these emotions can be unhelpful. These emotions, anger and empathy, are not bad, full stop. They're just damaging in excessive forms. Yeah. A second remark about defining shame in terms of eliciting a global self-evaluation, as Lewis, Tagney, and others do, is that again, defining emotions by soliciting personal narratives on each emotion may not be the best approach for classification. Guilt and shame are terms that are so closely related that people are bound to confuse them. Maybe not confuse, but conflate them. Tagney even points out that the terms are often used interchangeably in common discourse. There may be better ways to distinguish between shame and guilt on conceptual grounds than the focus of evaluation of each emotion. For example, it may be helpful to think about shames being more other regarding emotion, a more other regarding emotion than guilt is. Again, there's the social theory, but this definition does not follow from how study participants regularly classify the term. Yeah, so like the theoretical distinction, no one's actually using that except for like theorists. Regardless, to place this article in conversation with the contemporary literature and empirical findings on shame, I will be using the dominant definition as earlier stated. Shame is a negative valence, self-conscious emotion characterized by a critical global evaluation of the self. My one departure from the dominant account is that, following Christensen, I will not speak of a trait form of shame. Christensen points out that shame as a trait, that is, shamefulness, carries pejorative connotations and represents only excessive and disordered dispositional instances of shame. Following Christensen, I will speak of shame in two ways: as episodic, regarding short-term experiences of shame, and dispositional, regarding our long-term dispositions towards shame. Speaking of dispositional shame instead of the trait of shamefulness leaves open the possibility of moderate or healthy dispositions of shame. Yeah, I mean, if you fuck something up bad, you might feel shame for a long time because you fucked something up bad. And believe me, people can fuck things up bad. Like, you can feel shame for years if you do something particularly stupid. But it doesn't need to dominate your life either. Okay, the case against shame. By character education, I mean modes of instruction that bear the classical liberal arts assumption informed by Plato and Aristotle that learners are not excellent by nature. They do not naturally love the right things, think and act well on a consistent basis, or have suitable motivations for their actions. Rather, through discipline, exemplar exposure, and various forms of emotional learning, students need to be educated in such a way that they are formed in virtue and grow in freedom. As I have described, shame has traditionally played a role in this process. In this section, I assess various reasons why shame has fallen out of favor among Western moral educators and demonstrate why each of these reasons falls short of providing a compelling case against employing shame in virtue formation. The reasons assessed are follows: shame's negative effect, epistemic concerns about virtue and vice, potential consequences for health and well-being, worries about paternalism, and motivational concerns. All right, so we're just going to do a litany. There's going to be a rundown of all the bad theories according to the author. All right, first is negative effect. The first concern is that shame has a negative emotional valence. Shame feels bad. Sedigir Morinani writes that the feeling of shame can be incapacitating and unbearable, and by comparison, shame generates worse feelings than those invoked by guilt. In view of the contemporary trend such as positive parenting, the growth of mindfulness practices popularized in part because of how well mindfulness assists us in allaying negative feelings, and, redacted, interesting. I wonder if this is They need to update that before this goes to final publication. And what Christensen calls a hedonic view of optimal human functioning, the fact that shame has fallen out of favor is unsurprising. However, the fact that shame evokes negative feelings is not a particularly strong argument against shame. Many emotions, compassion, grief, emulation, regret, and remorse, feel negative but are morally productive. Experiencing these emotions veridically at the right times, about the right things, towards the right people, and for the right end and in the right way, is part of a well-ordered emotional life. For example, it would be unfortunate to experience anything but grief at the death of a loved one. To suppress negative emotions often means failing to see the world clearly and to respond to it adequately. Okay, and so for the philosophers out there, this is just like part and parcel. This is just straight up quoting Aristotle here, saying you have to have, and this also goes to the Stoic way of viewing things nowadays, you have to have everything in the right amount in the right way. And me, the cynic, I'm like, you motherfuckers, you have no idea what actually counts at the right times and about the right things and the right people and for the right ends in the right way. But this is a very popular view right now, and so I could expect actually a lot of people would agree with this paragraph. Just because something is a negative emotion does not make it bad, and I agree with that. And so you should be angry at certain things, and so you should also feel ashamed at certain things. Vipers says, apparently a 2012 study found that people who are easily embarrassed are more trustworthy and more generous than their peers. Another study showed that demonstrating physical signs of embarrassment, such as blushing, have been shown to help foster closeness in social circles and make folks more prone to forgiving the person feeling embarrassed. I can see that. because like if someone is obviously embarrassed, you can see how they feel about things. It's sort of like, and that's a reaction. It's sort of like a, not a reaction, it's a sort of, what's the word, it's just something that you don't have control over. So you can actually see when the person is feeling bad, and so you don't have to worry about them lying because the embarrassment is so palpable. And so that would foster trust because you can tell how bad they felt about the thing that happened. And so I could see that. It's not that they're more trustworthy, it's that you can tell that they're not lying. So because it's like they're wearing their heart on their sleeve in some sense, so you can tell that they're not lying because they're so obvious about when they feel good or bad. So I don't know if they're trustworthy, like if they are actually trustworthy, or like it's just they're obvious that they're lying. So but yeah, makes sense. All right, continuing. Nevertheless, the author sympathizes with those who feel uncomfortable about applying shame in character education because of how shame feels. Having this reservation seems like a suitable human response to another person's discomfort. Certainly, shaming should not be relished. Relished. Furthermore, admittedly, I know that negative valence emotions are a part of a well-ordered life, and it pained me when my toddler experiences them. Still, negative affect is not by itself a reason to avoid shame. Shame appropriately employed is instructive, as I argue in section below. Constructive uses of shame. Moreover, a life that consists only of happy sensations is not a human life at all. Again, this person's like super Aristotelian. If you do not feel all the things in the proper amount, you are not actually human. Of course, we don't know what that is, the proper amount. But yeah, it makes sense. Like, you're going to have some bad days, and that is what it is to be human, though. Epistemic concerns. Perhaps a strong reason to doubt the merit of shame in character education is that shame does not neatly track the ethical or what is morally blameworthy. And someone mentioned this earlier. How do you know that shame is going to tell you what to avoid? Rather, it tracks the set of traits and actions that other people construe as ought-nots. Therefore, as an epistemic and motivational tool of character education, both conveying moral knowledge and motivating attention to this knowledge through negative feelings, shame can misdirect learners. The first version of this worry is that certain bad actions that a society is not sensitive to or does not care about may not be shamed. Yeah, and so this is the thing. This is a cultural relativity of shame. If you are not being told that, like, you should not shame, like, if you say, like, okay, you can make fun of this, like you know, minority class of people, then, like, all of a sudden you think it is okay to, you know, crap on that minority, and you don't feel shame about that. It's like, no, we shouldn't do that, but there's a culturally relative thing. Yeah, an example of that, Western society often lauds rather than chastises greed. Yeah, well, capitalism. So, like, capitalistic stuff thinks greed is okay when it really isn't. In certain contexts, it is socially praiseworthy to be acquisitive and wealth-driven, as many celebrities are. Even though it would be helpful for a child to learn not to be greedy, he or she may need to learn this by other means than through tactics involving shame, because many social contexts are unlikely to shame on this basis. Yeah, I mean, this is what happens when your billionaires own the media. They don't say that it's bad to be billionaires in the media. And so you don't learn that, like, excessive, like, wealth is, like, or the desire for excessive wealth might be not the best thing. A second version of this worry, hi Jeff Bezos, like, we're on Amazon's platform right here. A second version of this worry is that certain actions that are not morally blameworthy may be shamed. An example of this, of the kind of shaming that can occur regarding dress and comportment in modesty cultures. Learners may come to view their bodies as inherently problematic and unwelcome, and this kind of self-directed uneasiness may persist throughout a person's life. You can get this, of course. Body issues is huge. Lisa Tessman points out how serious the second problem can be of employing shame for the wrong reasons. She provides an example of Chicana feminists rebuffing traditional masculinity and being shamed for racial disloyalty. Their resistance is seen as a kind of betrayal of traditional culture and values, and shame is used to silence them. Tessman calls this phenomenon dangerous loyalty and notes that it takes place often in situations where identity and politics are closely tied. Viper says, Jeff Bezos isn't interested in philosophy. If he was, he wouldn't be a billionaire. Vipers, I wouldn't be surprised if he was interested in it. I mean, what was that? Sam Bankman-Fried from the FTX meltdown. He had a whole thing on philosophy. Like he had this sort of effective altruism. Now, I think a lot of them admitted it was all bullshit and they were just using it to their own ends. But like these people do pay philosophy lip service because it may just be one of those social things that like they think being like rich and powerful and you need to be like cultured and stuff. But yeah, like they're interested in philosophy. They just are interested in philosophies that don't screw with their money usually. So, but I wouldn't be surprised if you catch these people, throwing around quotes. I mean, Elon Musk, you could see him throwing around like quotes from like philosophers and like, the pseudo intellectual bullshit. A third version of this worry is that a cultural context may shame rather than celebrate good traits and actions. An example is that honesty and integrity may be chided in the mafia. A second example is that school children often shame their peers for being academically serious. In these cases, shame opposes the work of character development. It is a tool for vice formation. Furthermore, many non-normative traits and actions are included in the set of objects shamed, such as issues of etiquette, for example, using the wrong fork, and social preference. I mean, that haircut was so 1995. In what follows, I address each of these epistemic concerns. Viper says academics are the worst people to heckle because they take your joke seriously. Yeah, and I always say that Aris is better at this than I'm. Like I'm just like, man, fuck you. But like he's like good at drawing the stuff out. Yeah, and so like I know your previous one was probably a joke, but like the problem is the situation is bad. Like people use philosophy all the time for whatever they want, and it's like, do I blame them? Well, I'm using philosophy for what I want, I guess. But it's like I don't really agree with them, yeah, in the way they're doing things. But who am I? I'm just some jerk on the internet. All right, so this is the epistemic stuff. Like, can we shame people for the wrong reasons? Absolutely. Author says, my first response is to agree that shaming for accidental features of persons that one finds unfavorable, such as a bad haircut. A bad haircut is not accidental. You went out and got yourself a bad haircut. That is your bad aesthetics. But whatever, author. If it just happens to be bad that day, is of course not a productive use of shaming for character development. Not all forms of shaming are constructive, and shaming that targets the wrong qualities, such as modesty of dress, or the right qualities with the wrong intentions, such as shaming someone's dishonesty to belittle them, are forms of bullying or social control rather than productive uses of shame. The kind of shaming Testman describes in particular is a problematic use of the emotion. It is probably confusing for the women because they are ostensibly being shamed for the sake of virtue, loyalty, for the sake of a virtue, the virtue of loyalty. This is an instance of neither virtue, loyalty, nor shame. It is moral imposture used to maintain control. And this is the thing. This is the problem this author has here. Who's to say what counts as the right thing to be doing at any given point? If you're going to be using shame and you are going to say it's always going to have to be thrown away at the end, like once a person gets their virtue into the place they need to be, and there's a problem with just generally virtue ethics, the way you treat them is like, well, that's not something you do once they already understand it. But like that, in some sense, you're always throwing away the ladder. You're always kicking the ladder away. So like the way it is going to be a form of maintaining control. The fact that the author doesn't like this right now, it says, well, they may be culturally different and they may disagree with you. But like, this cultural relativity, you have not actually argued that there is one kind of way that shame actually should be used when all these other things might be a shortcut to living the right way. So it's like, the author says is like the wrong kind, this is moral imposture. Is it? How do you know? What is the right way to be? Like this author thinks they know, but like, is it? I don't know. Maybe, the one particular society in like one little corner of the world that is like, a bit conservative considered conservative at the moment actually has human life right. They actually figured it out, and they're shaming people that don't live that way, and we all be like, well, that's not a very good use of shame, but they actually had it figured out. So how do we know? If you are subject to cultural relativity, you can't say that they have it wrong necessarily. You can argue on other grounds, just not that it's different. Alright, continuing. These instances of shame are unqualified harms. See, unqualified. Nah, I don't know if they're unqualified. However, other emotions can be elicited for bad ends too, such as evoking a group's sympathy to manipulate them into supporting a fabricated charity, or provoking someone's anger so they embarrass themselves in a job interview. So this is not an issue unique to shame. To argue that shame should be avoided altogether because it can be used for bad ends is an asymmetrical treatment of shame among other emotions. Second, the broader concern about the entanglement of etiquette and morality is not a worry unique to shaming, or even necessarily a worry. In early education, children learn lessons such as how to share toys with peers, be punctual, hold a fork, and wait patiently. Moral education often occurs alongside non-moral forms of socialization, and this is helpful rather than problematic. This is because many virtues are social in character. For example, justice, compassion, and generosity all involve other people, and following etiquette is sometimes the means by which we act in terms of a virtue. For example, being punctual, an etiquette, can demonstrate respect, the virtue. Saying thank you, the etiquette, displays gratitude, virtue. The fact that shame can direct both non-normative and normative actions is often a shortcut pedagogically. See, this is the problem. They say it's not, like, right here, this is not the like, you can conflate two different things right here. Just that they were saying you don't want to do it the bad way, but what counts as bad is not so clear. Viper says, it just occurred to me that perhaps the Irish propensity for banter, taking the piss, brutally insulting your best friend, etc., was actually birthed as a healthy management strategy for shame-driven Catholicism. I would not be surprised if that came out, like the religious and social history actually kind of played into what the current culture is. Like that's probably 100% true. Yeah, and like, but the funny thing is that would be more something you could ask Shane, because like you could look at other cultures that have similar situations, and maybe you could say, look, the Irish went this way, somebody else went that way, but like maybe they're similar. Okay, even so, it is helpful to be aware and to make learners aware that shame selects for bad actions that are not all moral in character. For example, it is helpful for advanced students to learn the difference between etiquette and morality so that they do not default to non-cognitivism or relativism the first time they experience different cultural norms or encounter someone holding a fork in a different way. Breaches in etiquette are fundamentally circumstantial, unlike morality, for which certain things may be right or wrong regardless of whether the context agrees it is. Consider Martin Luther King Jr., who sought justice in a social context that opposed him. Yeah, see, this is the thing. They're trying to recover some, like, sort of universal right here. I don't know how well they're going to do. This is a hand wave right at it. Saying, look, you got to go invoke, moral God. Martin Luther King Jr., who's, it'll be Martin Luther King Jr. Day tomorrow here in the United States, for his birthday. And it's like, but you have to, like, invoke some sort of moral character. It says, oh, this is universal. Is it, though? Like, this is just a hand wave appeal to authority. It doesn't make them wrong, but like it just means they're not doing a very good job of arguing for it, because appeal to authority works, but it's still kind of weak. Furthermore, the concern about shame failing to target certain objectively shameful qualities such as greed in a celebrity-obsessed culture or impatience in a work and productivity-focused environment is also not an intractable issue. If shaming were a standalone tool for character development or a solitary epistemic means by which we learned what was bad, then the fact that shaming misses certain traits and actions would be an issue. Have I seen that new MLK statue in Boston Common? I saw some pictures of it. It looks kind of, I didn't love it. Statues in pictures and video don't do it justice, so I saw it was getting a lot of crap. I don't know. I'm going to wait to see some more reviews of it. But like, yeah, it looked strange. But like, again, like videos may not do it justice. Things look better in sculpture is often not always best represented by video or like still pictures, so might be interesting. I wouldn't mind seeing it. I'd like to go up to Boston again. I haven't been there in years. Okay, as it is, there are other ways we learn about virtue and vice, such as through exemplars, virtue labeling, and explicit instruction. Shame does not need to offer a complete set of moral knowledge to be productive in character education. Oh, it looks like a dick from a certain angle? Okay, I didn't see that angle. But hey, why not? That's unfortunate. You hope you have to, you know, the sculpture should have like cut down on like penis, like looking from all angles. But you know, what are you gonna do? Now I want to go see it. All right. Perhaps the most serious epistemic worry is the second concern raised, and that one's social context may praise and blame the wrong things. This is what I was complaining about here. Let's see what they have to say. In these cases, shame is a tool of misdirection, undoing the work of character development. This is a Platonic concern. In Plato's Republic, Socrates admonishes the Homeric culture for shaming intellectual virtues in favor of war-based traits like physical prowess and love of fame, which Socrates believes are not the traits the citizens should have. To shame people for good qualities and to praise people for bad ones is, simply stated, a problem in character education. Moral educators are the greatest liability of moral education because the possibility of misdirecting learners. But again, this is not a problem unique to shame. Teachers and caretakers often misdirect children by exemplifying bad actions, giving misguided explicit instructions about good, bad, right, and wrong, and praising and blaming the wrong things. All character development tactics can misdirect learners if poorly executed. As such, this is not a reason to avoid shame. It is a reason to make sure those in authority positions over children are people of good character to the extent that this can be managed so that they are inclined to praise and blame the right things. Okay, so this is basically saying, look, we don't have a theory of this, of what's good and bad, but that's not shame's fault, and that's fair. But again, the Aristotelian version of virtue ethics, and most moral systems tend to have way too many ways that you can break them, and so people can always praise or blame the wrong things. Viper says that makes no sense. Both good and bad shameful actions are based on social standards. At least it's only relevant to foreign exchange students. Yeah. The standards are hard. They're just very hard. It's what it is. Like, no one actually knows, and they're just saying, okay, you just have to have people who are good people in the end doing the teaching. It is a reason to make sure those in authority positions, in general, not just over children, are people of good character. And you can tell by our current politicians that this always happens every time. We always have the best people in authority positions. Consequences for health and well-being. In addition, and also all of our billionaires are people of high standards, including Jeff Bezos, who owns Twitch. Consequences for health and well-being. Additional reason supplied against the use of shame in character education is that its negative repercussions for health and well-being are too severe on balance to justify any assets of shame. Sedig Gimornani mentions associations between shame and depression, social phobia, and eating disorders. Tagni et al. Describes feeling of being devalued, exposed, and ridiculed. Budiarto and Helmi and Ellison et al. Describe chronically low self-esteem rates and herd names, anger, and externalization of blame. Furthermore, as earlier described, Andrews et al. Described the possibility of shame having a lasting impact on one's personality. They describe the trait form of shame, which is called shamefulness. In shamefulness, feelings of inferiority, despair, helplessness, and eagerness to hide personal flaws reify into long-term dispositions. Frankly, if these are unavoidable or even likely repercussions of exercising shame in moral learning, then shame should be avoided. But these are not necessary or likely consequences of well-ordered shame. Again, now we're getting into this, how much shame is good shame? How do we know what well-ordering shame is? It may be helpful to reiterate Christensen's observation that much of the contemporary empirical treatment of shame concerns excessive rather than moderate or well-ordered instances of the emotion. One may concede that excessive, misplaced, or misdirected instances of shame are damaging in the ways described, even long-term, as the empirical work on shame demonstrates. However, there are moderate forms of the emotion, too, for which depression, despair, and other issues are unlikely to result. I do not doubt that outsized shame leads individuals to anger and externalization of blame, but that does not mean that we should stop correcting learners. It means that we should help learners to feel secure and educate emotion of shame, as we do for other emotions, so that learners can profit from critique. Yeah, I mean, again, shame is part of the human experience, and denying that to core is just probably a bad idea. Don't get rid of shame entirely. Someone might make a stronger claim about shame and its damages, that these damages are unavoidable or follow from the nature of shame. They might argue that the target of shame's evaluations, the self rather than the bad action, is problematic because this misdirects attentional resources away from developing a good character. Whereas guilt places attention on the bad action or quality, such that one is mobilized to fix a particular issue, shame is less action guiding in terms of reparative actions because it construes the entire self in an unfavorable way. Seeing oneself in global terms as problematic inclines a person to experience the very psychological issues described in the empirical work above: self-loathing, anxiety, and various manifestations of despair. Thus, in all forms, shame is a liability in character education. To this stronger claim, a response is that not only is global self-examination not inherently problematic, it is an asset in character development alongside guilt. Because shame focuses on the person rather than on singular actions, it facilitates a broader kind of moral evaluation. Shame can occasion reflections on patterns of action and motivations that govern these patterns. This is actually kind of interesting. You gotta think, can you actually change piecemeal? Or do you have to change more than one thing at once? Like, can you change one behavior on its own, or do you have to change all patterns of action to really change yourself in a more significant way? If you're always doing something piecemeal, it's kind of hard. It's like, I don't smoke cigarettes, but like people who have to quit smoking cigarettes, a lot of times there's like, you can't just change one little thing because you keep going back because it's too small of a change. A lot of people have to quit cold turkey because that makes it so that they have completely changes all the patterns of action, and that way they can break their habituated, like the habit of smoking. Yeah, so this is the whole thing. You need a bigger change sometimes to make a bigger change in yourself. Okay, so it can help a person to consider moral responsibility and culpability. This kind of self-awareness is a precondition of moral improvement. To grow in virtue, we need to be aware of two things: the character we currently have and the character we ought to have. Again, we're going hardcore Aristotle on we should be a better person here, better virtues. If we only know the character we ought to have without recognizing our deficiency in that respect, then we are unmotivated to improve or to close our character gap. Character gap, really? Okay. Shame can also foster humility because it is an affront to pride and overconfidence. This is the role shame has historically played in the religious context. A person recognizes failures of the global self. In response, she participates in practices such as repentance and reconciliation. These practices occasion productive changes rather than the inactive self-loathing empirically described as being associated with shame. Hurd describes how liturgies such as repentance and reconciliation redirect one's attention from an immobilizing self-obsessed shame to a productive sense of guilt and beyond. Yeah, so this is the thing. The historical religious stuff, of course, dealt with this in a religious context, but like they gave you an outlet to, improve upon things within that religious context. And so they understood that shame was actually a thing that could be used and sort of weaponized to make someone understand, to get someone into the religion. Viper says, we were talking about a similar idea earlier in Shane's stream. I've been rewatching The Wire and wondered if it's possible to reform the police, or if, like The Wire demonstrates, that police culture is itself symptomatic of the wider capitalist system. Yeah, I mean, I didn't see The Wire. That's probably a moral failing on my part. I'm in New York. The NYPD, it's like there's some good things, there's some bad things, but the idea that it's changing quickly is like, it's not going to change quickly. And so I am ashamed. I have to repent. The idea that it's going to change quickly, it's like it's not going to change quickly. So it's like the idea that you can like reform it slowly is like, that's not how it's not going to work like that. I very much doubt it. One of the cops, I actually work right next to a police substation, and one of the cops is he's retiring, or he's going off of medical. He got injured on the job, and I think they were letting him finish out a little bit of time doing the desk work. But like, he was a good guy, and he said he was proud because he never arrested anyone for any low-level crimes, like no smoking weed, no like mild disorderly conduct, nothing like that. So nothing, just people being stupid. he said he made arrests, but like all the arrests he made were like, assault with a deadly weapon. Like he had to arrest someone for stabbing another person, like attempted murder. Those were the things. And I was like, he's like, I'm proud of that. Like he said, I never got anyone in any trouble for bullshit, only for like, scary stuff. And I was like, yeah, and we were chatting. There were some other people there. I was like, good on you, man. He's like, yeah. I was like, that's good. Like, cops shouldn't be like just hassling people. And he was like, yeah. He's like, well, it's too bad because most of the people, like a good portion of them, don't feel the way I do. It's like, and he didn't mean like a portion. I think he said something like half of the people don't feel the way I do. My day job is paperwork. I fix paperwork for an organization. It's not anything related to philosophy or logic. I do some programming every so often, like just some scripting to get the books in order. I had to learn some like VB script to make run Excel sheets. Like I haven't even done that in a while. Yeah, I'm like a pseudo accountant at the moment. Like I just keeping the books for this one area of the organization I work for, make sure the bills are paid. Yeah, I work for Trump's account. That's exactly it. So, yeah. So, but that's the thing. Like, can you actually do things in the piecemeal way over a long enough time, as you were saying, Vipers? Over a long enough period of time, you can make small changes, yeah. But how long a period of time are we talking about? And do like bigger changes really need to like happen? Otherwise, it may never change, or at least not in our lifetime, and that's not very good. Okay. Moreover, according to Budiarto and Helmy, the emotion of shame depends on certain competencies. Children only start to experience shame when they are capable of understanding themselves as objects for reflection and have social maturity to understand and apply social scripts and rules of behavior. Again, social scripts and rules of behavior. These are like things, like general things you have to deal with. Shame depends on this level of cognitive maturity, but it also likely advances these abilities. As a self-conscious emotion, shame helps a learner become sensitive to norms as well as to the desires and ideas of those who enforce these norms. Shame can foster growth in a learner to see oneself through the eyes of another, and this is valuable for social interactions throughout one's life. The caveat of these assets is what I described earlier, that this should be well-ordered shame in the context of secure relationships applied prudently and with gentleness, but shame's focus is not inherently problematic. Yeah, so this is one of the things, it's like things get dangerous at certain points, but like, so does everything else. And so it's like, can shame be dangerous? Sure, but that's not special to shame. Alright, paternalism. An additional reason that shame has fallen out of favor is a concern with paternalism. The shamer has a position of power over the shamed person. The shamer places external sanctions on others' actions, compelling them to submit to a given norm. Jimenez describes this issue as making our values and our behavior depend too much on the opinion of others. Christensen refers to this as the heteronomy problem. Shame threatens to impede the learner's autonomy because shame is a function of the opinions of others. What was that? Okay. Heteronomy is a fair characterization of shame. However, as a critique of shame, one would either need to 1. Dismiss character education in general, or 2. First clarify why shame's paternalism is more problematic than the paternalism found in virtue formation more generally. Heteronomy applies to the whole character of education, as well as to parenting and socialization more broadly. There is a power and knowledge differential between caretakers and children, so any kind of instruction offered by parents involves some degree of paternalism. Socially, learners are shaped and directed by caretakers throughout childhood, and in character education, learners are formed through the imposition of disciplines and the external formation of desires. Caretakers help learners to habituate good actions and to act in terms of their own good before they are mature enough to recognize it for themselves. Viper says, because you were also talking about Aristotle earlier, I keep hearing Shane. Shane is a function of the opinion of others. No, that's like exactly. I keep doing that myself. I keep thinking I'm talking about Shane McGinnis, and I am talking about shame. But like, this is what's going on in my head also. But the other problem is every time I read about Aristotle, I'm also thinking of our buddy Aris. So it's like I've got like everyone who's like sometimes in chat is like also in the paper today. Okay, it's yeah. Author continues, ironically, even a learner's freedom is formed heteronomously in character education. This is referred to as the paradox of moral education. The paradox is that the habituation involves the extrinsic imposition of desires, attitudes, and actions in a learner. While habituation is taking place, it undermines an individual's free choice, but over the long term, it positions a learner to self-govern better so that she is more free. If everyone's in the same boat, Valpo too. Just glad there's no mention of snipers' platitudes. Yeah, should start dropping that in like the sentences. So this process is critical because being a free person involves more than just having externally unimpeded choices. It also consists of the ability to choose well without getting in one's own way, something we cannot do if we are unable to govern our own rogue emotions. There are important questions to ask about how, throughout the process of education, the learner comes to increasingly participate in her own habituation. This participation, as a learner matures, is necessary that she learns how to choose well. But the idea that character education or the socialization that occurs in childhood can proceed without ever needing to intrude upon a child's thoughts, actions, and emotions is naive. Summarily, yes, shame involves paternalism. For this reason, it is important to mitigate the possibilities of misdirection and abuse of power by ensuring that those in authority positions over children are people of good character to the extent that this can be managed. But shame's heteronomy is neither unavoidable nor unique to virtue education or to socialization more broadly. Again, there is no solution here. It's just that people in power, those in authority, have to not suck. And that's very hard to do, but like again, that's the only solution they have here. But again, that's all the author needs because it's not a question of it being a problem with shame. It has to do with how education more generally is being applied. Motivational concerns. The motivational concern about shame is as follows. Shame may motivate good actions, but shame is not a motivation suitable for good actions. Therefore, shame undermines the work of character education. On neo-Aristotelian accounts of virtue, virtuous actions should be performed for good reasons. This matches a common intuition that motivations change the nature of an action. For example, if we discover that a seemingly generous donor gives a large sum of money to a children's hospital, not to help the children but to garner praise, we would be disinclined to attribute to him the virtue of generosity. Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's so hard. It's like people's intentions don't always, like, just because they say things, they may be wrong about it too. It's like, maybe, but like, I always found this very wishy-washy. Just because you think they want the praise, but like they're being super generous about it. Like, this is what happens in like Twitch chats sometimes. Sometimes you see someone drop a lot of money because they're trying to get the streamer's like attention. Are they being very generous to the streamer? Yes. Are they doing it maybe because they want the streamer's attention? Also yes. The two things aren't mutually exclusive though. So you can't always pin down someone's motivation so easily. All right, but the author says this motivation is about him, specifically his perverse desire for attention. See, that's the thing. You're reading a lot into this perverse desire for attention. I know that's why all of you are in my chat right now. On these grounds, we may wonder whether using shame to motivate learners to perform good actions and to avoid bad ones sets them up for acting from unsuitable motivations, namely to resolve negative self-directed feelings or to be well received by others. An initial response to this concern is that shame is a tool for virtue development, not a description of one's final state. There's little reason to think that there would be motivational revision. There's little reason to think that there would not be motivational revisions later as the agent matured, in the same way that one matures in other ways throughout the process of developing virtues. For example, a virtuous agent will also need to develop practical wisdom, a stable dispositional pattern, with cross-situational consistency in performing the good action in a way that is not other referencing, but that follows easily from one's own good character. While it is true that acting from shame is not a fitting motivation for good actions, shame need not characterize one's motivations later on. Okay, yeah, this is the old. You have to. Everyone starts somewhere. How you get where you're going doesn't really matter all the time. The fact is that you had to get there somehow. Shame might be a good way to do it. Someone might argue that shame will impact later motivations by making a person superficial or more concerned with the appearance of virtue than the possession of virtue. If a learner becomes accustomed to thinking about how she is being perceived rather than who she truly is, This attentional shift can be a long-term impediment in moral development. I mean, again, you have to grow up at some point. If you don't, then you never grow up. Jimenez notes that for Aristotle, there is no conflict between shame and what is, in fact, good. Rather, shame helps one to develop suitable motivations for virtue. It not only prompts learners to perform right actions through painful habituation, but makes them perform them in the right spirit through motivating love of the noble and the truly pleasant, whatever the hell that might be, by engaging learners at increasingly advanced cognitive levels. Shame is an emotion that is attentive to kalon or nobility. Kalon is a term for which there is no perfect translation in English, but which captures the intrinsic value of good actions rather than what is good for ourselves. For Aristotle, kalon is the motivation for virtuous actions, and if we are shamed appropriately, our pleasures and pains developed aligned with what is in fact desirable and not. The suppressed premise here seems to be that even though shame is encountered externally through shame, we internalize these norms increasingly as we mature, such that these norms become socially independent over time. This is how, for Aristotle, shame only profits the young rather than the virtuous person. The virtuous person is motivated by kalon alone rather than by reputation or social sanctions. Stated differently, shame introduces us to kalon, but shame is no longer required and would actually impede virtue insofar as it is an unsuitable motivation once a learner recognizes kalon for herself and habituates acting in terms of it in the mature possession of virtues. Yeah, so once you internalize everything, then you're just supposed to know. Again, we don't know, is this going to be culturally relative? Probably, but this is what the theory is. It's like if we somehow have good people teaching them, then it will be less culturally relative, and we'll be able to, have the sort of nobility for ourselves, like a nobility of morals. Moreover, this internalization of norms that one encounters externally is not unique to shame. It also occurs with emulation. A learner admires another, is drawn to imitate or to act in terms of another's good actions. Never do as I've done. Do it better than me, motherfuckers. Don't do as I've done. Please don't emulate my dumbass. Over time, she sees and desires the good for herself. Empathy is an emotion that also matures in this way. Frans de Waal describes persons and select apes as being externally moved by the emotions of others. He calls this emotional contagion. Emotional contagion, wow. Okay. As persons develop, they internalize concepts of self and other until they can recognize and act for the other's good. De Waal calls this attributional empathy. This internalization of external norms characterizes shame's development as well. This explains in part why the shame-guilt culture distinction is untenable. Shame inevitably involves the internalization of sanctions in a way that becomes independent of external or social means of encountering them. Interestingly, moral psychologist Heidi Maybaum also draws on the de Waal and others in order to examine what shame's genealogy can teach us about emotion. She notes that the physiological correlates of shame are linked to social subordination and submission, and that the emotion plays the role in the appeasement of relevant social others in non-human animals. On these grounds, Maybaum argues that shame centrally concerns a failure to live up to public expectations. It is characterized by its submission to external norms. My one contention is that drawing on an emotion's genealogy in this way to characterize its mature human form is limited, in the same way that doing so would be problematic for empathy. As I have said, the emotion of empathy is one held in common among humans and non-human animals, but for de Waal, the mature form of empathy is a difference in kind from the layers preceding it. Likewise, shame's developmental trajectory is one best characterized in terms of the internalization of norms encountered externally. It may be the case that the social role shame plays for primates ceases to apply in its mature human form. Okay, so I guess these are all the those are all the criticisms, and we're going to move on to, let's see, we're on page 13. How far do we have to get? This is the problem with long papers. It drives me a little crazy. All right. Got to get to 18. So we got 5 full pages about to go. It's like, do we understand what's happening here? I think we understand everything that's happening here. I mean, this is not a bad paper. And just like a little break here. This is not a bad paper. They're saying, hey, look, people feel shame. Should we be ashamed that we feel shame? And they're saying, no, we should not be ashamed of feeling shame. This is just the human experience. Now, they have a very Aristotelian virtue ethics flavor to this whole paper. But like the idea that like shame needs to be gotten rid of seems excessive, and they're explaining why, at least from the Aristotelian virtue ethicist point of view. There's nothing so special about shame that it should be gotten rid of, except if you're focusing on the extreme cases. That's okay. If you will focus on any extreme cases, it's going to look bad. All right, so now we're going to turn to the constructive uses of shame. Yeah, how do we, weaponize this for our good? Here we go. In the previous section, I assessed various reasons why shame has fallen out of favor and demonstrated why each of these reasons falls short of providing a compelling case against employing shame in virtue formation. In the process of doing so, I also built a constructive case for employing shame. To review, shame is a memorable epistemic tool which can be used to teach learners what is good. It is memorable because of its negative emotional valence, and this also makes it an effective motivator, as many negative affective emotions are. Because of a desire to resolve negative feelings, the learner is inclined to make a change. Shame is a means by which learners internalize moral norms that they encounter socially. Moreover, shame fills a developmental lacuna about how virtuous practice begins. Moral virtues are acquired by doing, but initiating this practice is not something learners can prioritize from the start, since they already have dispositions in place that incline them to act in ways that may compete with moral virtue. Therefore, shame is a means by which non-virtue tracking dispositions can be dishabituated, such that a learner changes course. As a self-conscious emotion, shame helps learners to mature their pro-social awareness. Again, let me just stop for a second. Can shame really push you back into the right? Can it dishabituate you? I mean, I'm trying to think, like, if you're always worried about something, could you, like, is that constantly modifying how you're acting, and so taking that with you? I mean, I guess, but it seems hard. It just seems so hard to dishabituate because you feel bad about something and then you're going to change your whole life. There's a jump there. That's all. It's like, it seems a very difficult thing, but like maybe if you are constantly thinking about, oh, how can I improve this whole thing? But how does that actually happen? How does that dishabituate? How is anything dishabituated? I don't know. But shame apparently can give you the motivation to do it? Possibly. Alright. As a self-conscious emotion, shame helps learners to mature their pro-social awareness, become more sensitive to other people's emotions and desires. This makes it a helpful tool for the acquisition of virtues that involve others, such as generosity, justice, and patience. For example, if we can see people better, their emotions, needs, and desires, this helps us better anticipate and respond to their needs. It facilitates the ability to give suitable gifts in generosity and to perceive and mitigate injustices. Shame also facilitates global self-evaluations, profitable for assessing patterns of bad actions and motivations. This broad self-examination is afforded by shame's construal, whereas it does not follow from guilt. This offers valuable self-honesty and puts us in an epistemic position to grow in virtue, since we are aware of which ones we lack. Does it? It can tell you what's bad, but does it really tell you what's good? See, this is the problem. It can tell you the bad stuff, but like you have to look at how you're going to reformulate the good stuff. So the negative thing about shame, does that immediately give you an awareness of things you lack? Perhaps, but like it may not tell you how to get there. Viper says, I think I can think of scenarios where it could work like that. Like maybe you rip up your pants and your wee-wee falls out, or worse, it doesn't. Yes. How does that, like, you'd be like, oh no, I shouldn't have ripped up my pants. I have to get better pants. I mean, depends on, like, how far your wee-wee has to fall, too. I also described how shame is largely inevitable. It is often a consequence of being redirected or chastised in both formal learning settings and in life more generally. So speaking as though we can avoid feelings of shame is unrealistic. Our responsibility is to educate this emotion to help a child to be shamed in the right things and to manage a child's context such that experiences of shame do not leave them feeling unmoored. I describe how to do this in the following section. Additionally, as yet only briefly addressed, reason why shame is important in moral development is that, alongside emotions such as emulation and awe, shame is instructive regarding aesthetic dimensions of the good life. This is why I'm kind of interested in. What the heck do you mean aesthetic dimensions of the good life? It introduces us to moral beauty, or to what the ancients called kalon, fineness or nobility. That's such a weird way of describing it. Aesthetic dimensions of good life. Like the nobility is as aesthetic. Okay. Earlier, I described kalon as capturing the intrinsic value of certain actions. This quality matters because certain actions may be good even if they are not good for us. Moreover, kalon is the motivation Aristotle names as suitable for virtuous actions. Viper says, I love that your response to my humorous comments are less laughter and more an exasperated sigh. Yeah. Well, Vipers, what's generally happening here is I'm like thinking about stuff as I'm reading it out loud. So about midway through your chat comments, I'm starting to get the joke. If I'm lucky. I don't always get the joke because, you know, my brain's fried doing this. But like sometimes I get the joke and I'm just like, oh, I keep having to read it out. And so it's like I can't laugh immediately. I have to finish the thing and I'm just like, oh God, I have to like, you have to like finish the joke, and I just am like, oh God, all right, here we go. Just waiting for the punchline to get out of my mouth. And then that's why you get the exasperated sigh, because I already knew the joke was over, but I can read faster than I can like speak. So, or I read faster than I speak. So it's like the joke's already like registered for me, and I'm already like past it. Like, oh dear God, I have to just like say this now. Like the idea, like here's the thing, like that previous thing was like I had already seen like you rip your pants and wee wee falls out, or worse it doesn't. The joke was like, you know, okay, the wee wee falls out or it doesn't, but like it's like explaining the joke. Oh man, you can't do that. It stops being funny. But yeah. Okay. Anyway, not commenting on Viper's jokes, but like again, I find this very odd. They have no good way of describing kalon, because this is the whole thing that's doing a lot of work for them, that we do get a sense of what virtue should be, not virtue, like yeah, our like virtue should be, and that the shame directs us there, and they're just claiming this. They can't actually explain it, so I just find this interesting in general, but apparently this is like an Aristotelian sort of claim, and so I guess you can just, you know, appeal to the history. But like we can't actually tell you how this works, so just a point of like interesting thing there. That's like it's being stated or claimed, but not backed up by argument. All right, continue. In that shame tracks what is kalon, it expands our moral vision or means of seeing certain good actions as good. For example, consider a self-effacing, courageous action performed to defend one city in battle. Insofar as this action is self-effacing, it may not be constitutive of a good of an agent supporting a flourishing life. Even so, this action may be noble. It may be what one ought to do in a situation. Nobility is often an important guide when constitutive goods, or goods that support one's flourishing, are insufficient for capturing all relevant dimensions of a situation. Yeah, yikes, that's a sentence. A second example is that the life of a saint may be ascetic and austere. On certain accounts of virtue, such as Aristotle's, the saint fails to act in terms of temperance because his asceticism is restrictive. He exhibits a vice of deficiency toward pleasure. Even so, many would be inclined to say that there is something admirable and morally beautiful in the life of the saint. We see that he is good. His life is beautiful in ways that constitutive goods fail to capture. We often admire this person and are inclined to imitate his admirable traits. I think this is undermining their argument, actually. It's like, yeah, so you can see what's good in someone's life, but they're not getting it through the way that they're saying. So there are other things to do besides the Aristotelian framework here, which is a little bit funky to argue in the sort of very Aristotelian paper. But like they're saying even if you do things against Aristotle, Aristotle at least can account for explaining why people still think they're good. So this is a it's like even if when Aristotle's wrong, Aristotle's still right. Okay. Shame works along the same aesthetic dimension of the moral life. Yes, shame is attentive to appearance. However, appearance sensitivity is not necessarily superficial, or at least shame is no more superficial than admiring an exemplar or emulating her good actions on this basis. Certainly, sensitivity to appearance can go awry, such as when shame and admiration attend to the wrong qualities as good. But these are also important and largely inevitable emotions in the human life, and they both impact how we conceive of the moral life. If we educate these emotions, they can incline us toward virtue. If we do not educate them, then we may emulate unsuitable people and be shamed by the wrong things. Yeah, again, this is we have to get the right people in charge to emulate and to teach us. But again, they can't give you that in this thing. And they even admitted right here that like there are other ways to do important things than just this, like the Aristotelian way. Okay, shame and character education. Earlier I cited Christensen as noting that much of the contemporary empirical treatment of shame concerns excessive rather than moderate or well-ordered forms of the emotion. Empirically, we know that poorly ordered forms of shame are correlated with negative consequences, anxiety, chronically low self-esteem, and social phobias. In this section, I offer guidance on how to mitigate the possibility of these damages in the context of character education. This guidance comes in three forms: educating the emotion, managing the context around shaming encounters, and employing a mixed method approach to character education. As a reminder, by character education, I mean the classically informed modes of learning hatched by the ancients and refined by the scholastics that prioritize freedom-making and the acquisition of virtue in students. Moral educators assume that learners are not by nature already excellent or capable of fully governing their own emotions and of thinking, feeling, and acting well consistently and with cross-situational stability, but with discipline, emotional learning, exemplarism, and other methods, they are capable of becoming so. As we explored in previous sections, shame is often employed as a means of dissuading bad actions and motivating good actions in learners, helping them to reliably feel pleasure and pain about the right things, and to learn to perceive and to act in terms of what is K-Lawn. But what in practical terms does it mean to employ shame? Viper says, my main takeaway from this paper is that some words, like good, are bad words. Yeah, this is what happens in philosophy. You start to realize that a lot of the words that are coming out of people's mouths are not good words. They are bad words. One of the things that I've actually discussed this with other philosophers is that you're going to find there's something we kind of call weasel words. And weasel words are words that people use all the time that sound like they mean things, but they really don't. And this is where I'm going. Weasel words tend to be broader and precise, but what's up? Welcome back, Maddie. Weasel words are so broader and precise, they don't actually help. But a lot of times they get used because they say or they sound like they mean something, they sound impressive. And so there's certain words I don't use because I think they're more like that. That they just basically are not helpful even though they sound great. Yeah, exactly, Maddie. Like when people say studies say, or like it's well known that, it's like, no, it's not well known. Tell me what studies say, or tell me who said that. Tell me specifically. And it's, and I have my own little set of them. I know other people have other words. And I was telling people that like, I don't like using the word reasonable. Reasonable is extremely, that's a good way of putting it. It's an empty bridge to the next useful point. If you're calling something reasonable, more times than not, I think of reasonable as a weasel word, and I know a lot of people don't. It gets used all the time, but it doesn't actually tell you what what's important about something. It just means that they like the word. Yeah, when someone appeals to common sense, as Maddie says. That's right. It's like you're appealing to what's reasonableness. It's like that doesn't mean anything to me. It's like saying common sense without actually defining any of these terms. And so this is, But like that's exactly what is happening here. If you just keep saying the word good, and this is what I was harping on the Kalon, where they're not defining what it is to be in this sense good, the aesthetic, moral ideal, the nobility. They can't tell you that. Then you start to realize that there's a serious lack of like that. There's a problem here. But again, this is not a bad paper. All moral theories go this way at some point. Do you actually know what it is to calculate the good in a consequentialist theory? No. There is no mathematical formula and a definition of how what counts as a good in the world that you could add up. It doesn't exist. So every time they say you just got to figure out the good, yeah, according to what mathematics are you talking about? Or how do you actually pick out the good in the world? Like, is this one unit of good, this pencil? Like, what the fuck does that even mean? Where are you going to add that up from? And not to let the deontologist off the thing, what is it to follow a rule? What is it to follow a rule? Tell me what counts as rule following, and you're going to get the exact same problem. No one can exactly tell me what it is to follow their laws in deontology. And so this is not unique to virtue ethics, but the author knows this. This is why they keep hand waving and says, well, we just have to have good people in charge. It's like, okay. And again, yeah, I just had to use the word good there. Yeah, so I'm just a simple country lawyer, but yeah. Rouletting, what's up, Infernal? Hey, look, I decided we can do like the sociology shout out now. I got the little sociology shout out. But everyone should go follow Infernal. If you don't know Anne is lovely. She's a sociologist. Knows some Marxism too. Let's do proper shout out. Hey, I'm not even typing. There we go. Proper shout out. So if you're not following Infernal, go ahead and follow Infernal. Lovely streamer, and you can ask her basically anything about anything, and she will probably have something reasonably smart to say about that. So yeah. Maddie says they're both setting themselves as a person of authority while also trying to portray themselves as somehow socioeconomically lower to appeal to that group. Yeah, they're trying to make themselves be a Ann, what's up? How you doing tonight? They're trying to make themselves have something in common with the people they're arguing with, while both also saying that they are knowledgeable. So it's exactly right. So these are rhetorical tricks, but like when you're doing philosophy, you just have to be on the lookout for terms like this. And so they're not always, it's just, you have to just know what actually is the content. I'm okay, and reading this paper is a request by Valpo. It's a little longer than I want, but we're getting towards the end here. Just a few more pages. Basically saying that, look, shame is a legit human emotion here, and we should learn to make the best use of it that we can, especially in education, because kids have to learn what to feel bad about, really, as opposed to feeling bad about nothing or feeling bad about too many things. You have to give the kids the right stuff to feel bad about, and so shame needs to play a positive role in education. And it's like, how do we actually do that? And this author is giving a very Aristotelian take on this, so that's okay. Other than that, like, this is not a terrible paper, so I'm not like unhappy with it. But other than that, let's see. Oh, I finished up a corrections to a paper I'm going to send out, so I'm pretty pleased about that. Maybe I'll send it out tomorrow. I'll try and sit on it tonight, because I do stupid things. I think I'm like, oh, it's good, and then I read it the next day. I'm like, no, it wasn't that good. But I'm pleased about that, so I should just send it out and be done with it. But anywho, yeah, I want to get through with this, is what I want to do. We only got 3 more pages. Applying shame in moral education can look one of 2 ways. The first way is leaving space for the emotion. Often when a learner is chastised because of some bad action, the inclination can be to allay these uncomfortable feelings immediately, in much the same way that one might be motivated to explain away youth athletic losses and to give everyone a trophy. Oh, come on. Okay, boomer. No one gave everyone a trophy until the boomer generation to do it. And you didn't explain away athletic losses. You can explain youth athletic losses because, well, whatever. But, okay, boomer. The sentiment behind doing so is altruistic, to protect the child from uncomfortable feelings, but uncomfortable feelings can be instructive. In moderate forms, experiences of shame can be valuable for redirecting a child toward good actions. So the first means of employing shame is to just make space for feelings of shame to occur. Yeah, well, there's nothing inherently wrong with... No, I agree, Maddie, that there's nothing inherently wrong with those awards, but they get, they get like a... I don't know where you are. In the U.S., people have been giving like, oh, your generation all got like trophies and you all think you're like great, and you're like, you don't understand that, like, some people win, some people lose, and like, the people who win deserve more. Oh, you're in Kansas. Okay. You probably understand perfectly well. I see this in the media and I'm like, the people who are criticizing it are the boomers who started this practice. They are the ones that started it, not the kids. It's the parents. They felt bad. And so they started the practice, and then the kids, like my generation, I'm an elder millennial and younger, are like getting crap for this. It's like, no. We didn't ask. I didn't ask for any extra trophies. That wasn't me. So, like, this is just the thing. It's like, this was my generation, but I didn't ask for it, and I didn't like it. To tell you the truth, I didn't care. Like, it's not that I didn't like getting a trophy. It was nice getting something, but I didn't care that like I was getting a trophy for participation. Well, that's true. Anne says they just want to go back to a time when it was okay to slap your kid around. I think it's because I'm trying to understand why. I think the boomer generation is starting to realize that maybe they didn't do things the right way and they're feeling bad about it, and they don't know what to do. Yeah. Yes, and Maddie says, yes, the older generations are the ones adding to emotional responses and emotional baggage to it. Yeah, I think this is the thing. I think the older generation at this point in the United States, I don't know about the rest of the world, realizes things didn't go the way they thought it would, and they don't know how to handle that. And so they are trying to repudiate things that happened on their watch and blame like the other generations for it, when it's not my generation that I got participation trophies, which I did. But like, again, they didn't mean much to me. But it wasn't, like I said, I like getting them. It was fun to get something when I was a kid, but like I knew I didn't like earn it in any way. It wasn't like an award for like doing anything. Okay. Furthermore, it can be helpful to talk with a learner about the shaming experience, where the moral failing was, and how to move forward. Yeah, I mean, again, talking it out can help, I guess. A second way to apply shame is a more active approach than just leaving space for the emotion. It is to address bad actions directly in such a way as to occasion shame. And an example is a parent offering correction when a child fails to share a toy, or a teacher chastising a student for intellectual dishonesty on an essay. These rebukes should ideally occur in the context of secure relationships, as I described below, and be mindful of the sensitivity of the specific learner. Moreover, educating character by way of shame should not be relied upon as a solitary or even dominant tool in character development because of what it fails to teach. I explain these ideas in the sections below. Yeah, I mean, you have to, like, I agree with the author. You're going to feel shame as a human, and the idea that, like, you're not is just, like, a little bit of coddling. No, it's not a little bit. It is coddling if you think that no one's ever going to feel bad. So, how you do it, I guess, matters. All right, educating the emotion. On neo-Aristotelian accounts of character, a substantial part of virtue education is the training of one's emotions. For example, a child becomes easily exasperated and regularly throws tantrums. Rather than discouraging him from experiencing anger altogether, the objective is to redirect this emotion so that the child experiences anger at the right times, about the right things, towards the right people, for the right end, and in the right way. Anger, when rightly directed, is valuable. It shows us when there is an injustice, and because of its negative valence, it motivates us to act to redress that injustice. I've already made the case that shame is an emotion worth preserving. However, like anger, its poorly ordered forms are destructive. It is important to educate this emotion as well. Yeah, I mean, I've seen people punch, I remember in high school a kid punched a locker and broke his hand. That was probably not what he should have been doing. So like, that was anger, he punched a locker, he broke his hand. I was thinking about this because one of the streamers I watched said when he was in high school, he punched a locker and broke his hand. So I was like, yeah, don't do that. It's bad. That's not a good use of anger. The notion of a well-ordered shame is an interesting one. Earlier, I described how, for Aristotle, there is no virtue form of shame. This is because shame is a process emotion that facilitates one's moral formation by constraining bad actions and helping one to recognize what is noble. Anne said, I punctured a door and fractured a knuckle. I don't punch hard. Well, it's not hard to break your hand. It just isn't. Yeah. I think I must have fractured a knuckle once, but I punched something very hard I shouldn't have punched, but like I proved my point. It was good. Yeah. Shame is no longer relevant once someone is virtuous, since they are already motivated by what is noble rather than by the opinions of the many, and they do not require their bad actions to be constrained. Conversely, there is a virtue with respect to anger for Aristotle, good temper, so the comparison to anger falls short. Yeah, I mean, again, we've been talking about this a bunch. Shame is something that teaches you, so once you figure it out, you get rid of it. But that's okay. That's a lot of learning is like that. Assuming that Aristotle is correct and that there is no virtue with respect to shame, what makes the education of shame odd is that to educate shame into more mature forms is to make it approach an asymptote whereby it ceases to be relevant. Stated differently, if shame were to mature into its fullest form, in recognizing what is indeed shameful and consistently acting on this basis, shame would cease to be required altogether because the agent would be virtuous. There are at least two possibilities for dealing with this oddity of shame's development. I mean, this is dumb. No one's ever going to be a moral saint, so everyone's always going to have a little bit of shame. You're just going to cut it down over time. Like, that's it. Viper says, I think I have freakishly strong bones. I've never broken one. In fact, one time a guy headbutted me in the face and his head started bleeding. That's amazing. Yeah, maybe you're, what was that? Like that M. Night Shyamalan movie, like with Mr. Glass. You're Bruce Willis. So. Yeah, I broke a leg, I bruised a leg, and I've told this before, but I broke my nose in 10th grade in a pep rally. We had a student-teacher basketball game, and I go up to block on my 10th grade social studies teacher, and I think I was in 11th grade at the time, and he goes like this, and he goes across with his arms, like holding the ball, and his elbow catches my nose. And my nose just crushed, not crushed, but it got smashed, and blood started going immediately out my nose. I could feel, I put my hand up, and it was dripping off my elbow, in the next second. So I just walked out, and no one knew what happened, because I just walked off the floor. And no one knew what had happened to me. I went to the nurse, and then I went to the hospital, and yeah, my nose was broke. But I think that's my only broken bone. I may have cracked, like I said, I might have cracked that knuckle once, but I may have just bruised my hand. Viper says, I was like, shit, he must have really bust something if I left that much blood on his head. Then I realized it was his blood. You made me bleed my own blood. That's funny, Vipers. Yeah, so. Again, someone who headbutts you may not actually know what they're doing either. So, they may have hit with the wrong part of their body. I mean, how many people actually go for the headbutt? Maybe not the smartest people. I knew a guy who was a small dude. Okay, I will ask you about getting a scar on your balls. I knew a guy who was a small guy, but he was hanging out with some tough dudes. And so he was hanging out with these tough dudes that I knew. And they were at a club, and guy was dancing with a girl he knew. He got angry with the guy, and he went in with the flying elbow. So the flying elbow, he jumped up and elbowed him in the head. And he thought, because he wasn't really a fighter, but he thought, he was I'm tough. He thought that would knock the guy out. The guy was like, ow, what the fuck? And he starts to go beat the fuck out of him. And then all of a sudden the friends had to come and be whoa, you can't beat this guy up, we're sorry, we have to apologize, and they had to buy him a beer or something. But it was people don't realize how to fight, so it's that's the other funny thing too. But it's not hard to break your hand, it's not hard to break your nose. You gotta catch yourself, easy to catch yourself in the wrong way. That's all. I'm not saying a whole lot about that, but yeah, and we'll find out about Viper's balls eventually. Okay, let's get through this. The first possibility is Christensen's account. Contra Aristotle, he contends that is a virtuous form of shame. He argues on the grounds that even if virtuous agents are consistently act for the good, such that retrospective shame does not regularly feature in their lives, they will still need prospective shame as a deterrent voice to warn them against potentially base future courses of action. Yeah, again, this is what I was saying. You could still continue to morally grow, and so you still need shame in the future, even if it never comes up again. Okay, if the agent were not in need of such a voice, this would indicate that they're morally infallible. Yeah, they'd be a moral saint, and they would cease to be human. But what Christensen describes here as prospective shame does not seem much like shame at all, both because this is exclusively an internal sanction of a potentially bad action, and because in avoiding the action, the agent also avoids a negative self-evaluation that centrally characterizes the emotion. Since we are defining the emotion in terms of its construal, this is a significant change. Okay, but not really. It's more theoretical, but fine. The second possibility is the author's own view. This is to accept the oddity of shame, that its development makes earlier forms of the emotion obsolete. As one grows to recognize and align with what is in fact praiseworthy, to recognize and oppose what is not, and to act consistently on these bases, shame changes its form. In the case against shame, the author made the comparison of shame's maturation to how Franz de Waal describes the development of empathy. For de Waal, empathy starts as the germ of an emotion, naive, unreasoned, emotional contagion, which advances as an agent matures socially and intellectually. In its most mature form, called attributional empathy, which de Waal describes as acting for another's good, what appears is something like the virtue of justice. It is still technically the emotion of empathy. But what de Waal describes attributional empathy as a difference in kind from the preceding layers of development because its matured perspective on self and others. Okay, so empathy turns into justice, but that's its evolved form. Like it's what's it called? Pokemon. It starts off as one thing and it evolves into something similar but completely different, like a very much bigger thing. So emotions are Pokemon. Here we go. Now we're getting somewhere. The emotion of empathy develops in such a way that it gives way to the virtue of justice. Likewise, shame matures into its recognition of what is good, such that it gives way to virtue. Pokemon. Nice, Vipers. We can describe this matured form as the virtue of shame, as Christensen does. It plays a role in deterring potential bad actions. The virtue of shame also reliably recognizes what is good, praiseworthy, bad, and blameworthy and acts accordingly. But crucially, in its mature form, the virtue of shame forfeits the construal that characterizes the emotion of shame that we earlier described. Yeah, but what is the next one? Like they're saying the virtue of justice is what comes out of empathy. What is the virtue of shame? What is the next form of shame in that case? Right. Maybe they'll say something, because that would be a really interesting question. What really, if you are like a full-on grown-up and like a real like full human or something, not like perfect, but like what can you actually look for in society for people that are this way to be doing? They don't have to be perfect, but they have to understand how shame acts and then how that actually can evolve into something bigger. That'd be interesting. I don't know if they're gonna have that sort of idea here. Alright, given all of this, how do we mature the emotion of shame? I've already described how shame is an emotion attentive to moral beauty. One way to advance shame's sensitivity to beauty is by exposure to what is morally beautiful or praiseworthy. This can occur through exposure to exemplars who model good and beautiful actions. It can come through good books that instruct our moral imaginations and show us what is good and beautiful. It can also by way of explicit conversations about shame and its objects with mature learners. These conversations can address mistaken cases of shame, times when shame has been wrongfully employed, both in terms of misuses of power and mistaken objects, for example, bad haircuts. This person really doesn't like bad, or really feels bad about their haircut. They keep bringing this up. They can address what is indeed shameful, such as instances of injustice, selfishness, and greed. These conversations can occur at higher levels of maturity as children age. Another way to instruct the emotion of shame is to model suitable responses. When shamed or criticized in the company of a child, a caretaker can demonstrate how to self-examine in productive ways, assessing whether the shame was warranted and, if so, addressing how the caretaker might learn and grow from the episode. A caretaker can also partner with the child experiencing shame to talk them through the experience and help them move forward. This offers a student practice in mobilizing shame from the empirically described feelings of paralysis and despair to making steps towards reparation and improvement. A rough comparison to a pedagogical perspective helpful here is how it can be instructive to let students fail in secure settings. As was explained in the previous section, uncomfortable feelings in youth athletics and in moral failings can provide an opportunity for growth. Oh, so this is so disappointing. They could not come up with a mature form of shame. Like, what could it be? Once you get like a little bit of empathy in you, then it becomes like a full-on social justice thing. Like, you can learn what it is to have like public justice. Now that you have a little bit of shame in you, what could that actually be? Like a governmental sort of governmentally, like, because justice is sort of a government thing. So like you could have a society level thing of a reflection on what, like a social project. What could shame do? Like, what could we actually do with shame? And that, like, once it stops being a social shame, but like an enshrined institution of some sort, similar to justice. Yeah. I mean, we have memorials. We have memorials to the stupid things our country has done and to people who have died and things like that. Like, say, okay, we have war memorials to the people who have sacrificed their lives for, like a World War II memorial in the United States. People sacrificed their lives to defend, the country and the world from fascism. There's a lot of shameful things about war. There's not necessarily, the whole thing isn't necessarily shameful, but like, maybe that's more what it is, that there can be a public recognition of the things that like we as a society could be ashamed for, but we have to learn from. So this is more like a memorialization of our like failings in a good way. So there's nothing shameful about like war memorials in themselves. Those there's no shame there, but they do represent a mature looking sort of view of these sorts of things. And so maybe there's something in that sort of the institutionalization of looking at very painful parts of our history. And similar, like that is also enshrined similarly in justice. How do we interact with each other? Well, that's enshrined in justice. How do we look back on our moral failings? We do have memorials to these sorts of things. So maybe more memorials is what we are needed here, is really what is being called for here. Like the Challenger disaster, where we lost some astronauts in a space shuttle explosion. Like, we can, like, what have we done to show, like, that we have gotten better from that? We don't have to be ashamed. Well, we should be ashamed that we didn't treat our own people well. But, it's like, what have we done to show that we are now doing better? I don't know. Okay, I think the call on the moral thing. Viper says, I watched a Zach De La Roca speech earlier where he described the U.S. as the most brutal nation to have ever existed, built on genocide, built with a chattel slavery, and the only country to have dropped an atomic bomb on another country. Yeah, sounds about right. The U.S. is very warlike. Very, 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 very warlike. We kill a lot of people. We abuse a lot of people, like in slavery, and yeah. I mean, sure. Like, that's the history. And anyone who says it isn't is like doesn't know the history of the United States. Like, simple. So, but like, that's the thing. What are we doing to bring that these things back into the consciousness of the country that we don't necessarily have to feel ashamed about now? We don't need to feel ashamed about the history, but we do need to sort of make our world, our country, a better place. And so, can that be done? Like, maybe it can be. So, can we make like more? And I don't know. Is memorials actually a good way of doing it? No idea. But like, that's just how we at least can institutionalize something in a positive way that may have been a shameful act. Like we were talking about the Martin Luther King Jr. Statue in Boston that just got released. Or not released, but whatever. Put on public display, finally. It's like, is that the sort of thing, making public works of art that can say, all right, we feel bad because we lost Martin Luther King Jr. because, well, he got assassinated when trying to talk about the economic plight of people and the wage gap, basically, in this country. Unveiled. Thank you, Vipers. So I was like, is that a good thing? Yeah, I think it's a good thing to have memorials to our moral leaders. But, like, is that really a way to make a society level sort of thing that we want to, like, where we can show our shame, but also in a positive light, so we don't feel the shame anymore, but so that it is not lost from the collective memory. I've mentioned this before, but a while back, it's a long time ago, I was in the hundreds in Philosophy Roulette. You can see I'm at 399 right now. But people claiming to be Antifa came in and thought I was this right-wing commentator, and they came in and they fucked up my stream. And the great irony of that day was I was reading a paper on how institutions can have maintain a collective memory for the bad things they've done. Like, how do we actually remember the institutional mistakes? And I was like, hot tub stream for 400? Maybe. Maybe. I mean, I don't think I'm going to read another paper now because I'm already 2.5 hours into this one, even though it's going to be over in the next page. But, like, yeah, maybe hot tub stream. Maybe I was really considering going back and reading some Wittgenstein. Maybe the philosophical investigations. Literally no one else will care except for other philosophers. But, like, I don't know. I will take suggestions. But, yeah. Yeah. I don't know. But yeah, it was the great irony of the time I was being accused of being a right-wing fascist was that they straight up called me a Nazi. They was the one time when I was reading a paper literally on how to have institutional memories of, like, bad times. Like, how do you not forget the bad things your country's done? Yeah. And did I never tell you that? Yeah, because I was like, people came in and I was like, I didn't even know how to ban anyone. I was like using the wrong commands and they were laughing at me. And then, like, I did finally ban them. You know, they knew how to get around the ban. They had, like, multiple accounts, so it didn't do anything. I sat there and I argued with them for about 15 minutes, and then they realized I wasn't who they thought I was, and, you know, I think they ended up following the channel. Well, what happened was, I think 2 weeks or so before that was that I read something by a right-wing philosopher. And, you know, I didn't agree with it, but I give everyone a fair shake on the channel, and I was being nicer back in the day. I wasn't just calling people out on bullshit. I was trying to, like, you know, make it sound a little nicer. So maybe someone saw I had read a right-wing paper, and it wasn't like, rah, rah, this person sucks. I was like, no, this is wrong, but, like, here's why, and, you know, just doing my normal bullshit. And so I think that's what happened. And so they thought I was, like, pro-right-wing because I had read something. And this was in a legit philosophy journal. It wasn't like it was a terrible paper. It was not. It was just not very good. But, like, so what? So, like, I think that's what happened. So. So woke, you hate the woke. Could use more sleep, really. Okay, let's finish this up anyway. Managing the context. Emotions do not occur in a vacuum. If a shaming experience occurs in a harsh context, a learner is less likely to grow from the experience. Feelings of worthlessness or shrinking, as described as consequences of shame, can be mitigated in the context of loving, stable relationships where the shamed person's identity is secure. Yeah, so now we're getting into identity politics, as you said, like, so woke. In these contexts, it is more likely that there will be opportunities for restoration and accountability for an improvement after being shamed. Having room for improvement after being shamed is important because it means the learner has support for building virtuous habits, which is the objective of employing shame in the first place. Of course, these are helpful reminders in situations with moderate forms of relational strain and insecurity that we need to provide opportunities for restoration and to focus on building trust and security before employing shame. With Tessman, we have discussed situations more severe in which shame appears as a form of negative social control. In situations like these, I am less optimistic about the constructive role of shame in moral development. Yeah, I mean, if someone already has a shit life, you don't want to make them feel worse. In some cases, exceptional misuses of the emotion, there misuses of the emotion, there are ways to mitigate its harms. Consider how American youth and professional track and field is under the authority of Safe Sport. This organization monitors and advocates for athletes impacted by emotional abuse, hazing, bullying, and improper shaming. This organization does good work to protect against these harms, but absent of this kind of supervisory organization or means of allaying social abuses of the emotions in other contexts, we should be wary of shame's role in shaping norms. So we've got some sort of American youth and professional track and field is under something of Safe Sport. I mean, like, this just sounds so weird because in the United States we had a massive scandal where basically a huge number of our female gymnasts were abused by their doctors, and I think the guy's in jail for like untold many years. And so, like, the idea that this actually works, I mean, maybe it does work in track and field, but like, this has been very bad in the United States, and apparently the guy was reported to the FBI multiple times and the FBI didn't do anything. And so, like, yeah, we need these supervisory organizations, but I don't know how well they work. Anyway, yeah. You can look that one up. It's pretty disgusting. Okay, employing mixed methods. Finally, shame should not be considered a solitary means of character development. Viper says, like any movement, it turned into a dogmatic coalition, unthinking because that changes social cohesion of the group, making it disingenuous, unreasonable, and extreme. Yeah, I mean, that's part of like just movements in general. Like, things degrade into just like keeping social structure together. But like, is that a quote from somewhere? Like, probably is. I'm losing it at this point. But like, this is what happens to maintain social cohesion. As you say, it becomes not what it used to be. And it's like, you know, this is like, you're not punk anymore. You're not really in the spirit of punk. You're just doing something else. Okay. Finally, oh, you pulled that out of your ass. It sounded very good, Vipers. Like everything else you pull out of your ass. In the section, The Case Against Shame, shame was described as an insufficient epistemic means by which we learn about virtue and vice. For example, one's context may fail to shame certain bad actions, for example, greed in a consumerist culture. It may also unhelpfully target good actions, for example, humility chided as sheepishness. We also examined how the character deficiency of moral educators can cause learners to be misdirected about what is indeed shameful or blameworthy, a worry that is one of the greatest liabilities of the emotion of shame. Because of these limitations, additional methods should be employed alongside the use of shame. Other methods include introducing students to exemplars or role models for them to emulate, virtue labeling, or naming and praising the good actions we see a child perform, virtue practice such as being provided good opportunities to perform good actions like helping behaviors, and initiating elaborative moral discourse about good actions, suitable motivations, and one's responsibility in virtue and vice. Exemplar exposure in particular is a helpful complement to shame. This is because while shame teaches a learner what they should not do, exemplars provide a vision of what to do or to be instead. If all that having a good character required was the absence of bad actions, then shame would be a sufficient deterrent to sustain the moral life. But since having a good character also concerns the actions we do perform, learners need to see which actions are choice-worthy and to practice them as well. Admiring exemplars and being motivated to do likewise is a helpful means of doing so. Shame should be considered a companion emotion to positive valence moral emotions such as admiration, rather than a standalone tool for virtue development. Conclusion. This article assesses various reasons why shame has fallen out of favor among moral educators in the West and demonstrates why these reasons fall short of providing a compelling case against employing shame in virtue formation. It proposes reasons why we ought to employ shame with care in early childhood and provides a preliminary sketch of shame's development in connection with virtue. Moreover, it proposes ways to use shame constructively in character education while mitigating potential damages as part of a mixed method approach to character education. Okay. I hope Valpo was happy. But yeah, this is one of the longer papers I've read on stream. This is full on like 20 pages of, or almost 20 pages, and it's not small. Not like a short paper here. What's there to be said? Yeah. I mean, I actually mostly agree with this paper. We're not going to get rid of shame, and since it's going to happen, we should at least do it well. How do we do that? That's going to be that's an engineering problem. Like, if you're going to feel shame, and you're going to feel shame, you're going to fuck something up. If you never feel bad about anything you ever do, you're either a moral saint or you're a psychopath. And, either one of those is unlikely, and either one of those is like you can't change either one of those. So for all the people that aren't moral saints and complete psychopaths, like, you're gonna feel shame every so often, and how do you deal with that? We should have the tools to deal with that, and it should be taught hopefully early enough that, like, you know, you have it for a long time so you can deal with all your problems more often than not. But all the other stuff here, who the fuck knows? Like, how that all happens, fine. I appreciate them going through the all the ways that, like, people are, like, saying, like, it wouldn't work, because that's useful to people like these epistemic concerns here and, like, negative effect. Yeah, because that at least gets people back to the actual phenomenon. People are going to feel bad about stuff every so often, and what do you do about it? You have to be able to do something about it. You can't just do this. You just can't deny that people are just like, oh, don't feel bad ever. Like, that's not going to help anyone. Viper says, I can totally picture one of us saying one of Grandma's final wishes was that we watch all of our favorite movies together as a family after she passed, Shane. And then sticking on that Michael Fassbender movie about being a sex addict. Yeah, like... Right. So it's like, what was that movie? Damn it, I don't remember. But it was with was it Michael Scott? But, like, it was this thing where they're bringing their daughter to some, like, talent show, and the grandpa had, like, taught her to do some dance, and there was gonna be there. And spoiler of the movie, the grandpa had taught like, this little kid to basically pole dance like a stripper. And so after this whole thing, they get to this thing, and Little Miss Sunshine, thank you, Vipers. So, like, this is the sort of thing. It's like, and then do they feel shame at the end of the movie? And the whole point of the movie was the whole thing had just gone, this road trip that they were taking to get the kid to the talent thing had just gone, everything had gone wrong. It's like they felt no shame at that point because they were more, it was more important that they support their kid in some sense than, like, not be an ass in front of other people. And so that was like a moral development thing there. Like, you have to support your kid and to prevent them from having shame from something that wasn't her fault, because it was the, like, dirty old grandpa taught the kid to do a pole dance or whatever, like a stripper thing. So, like, this is the thing. It's gonna be part of life. Life is gonna be uncomfortable sometimes. We all fuck up, like, and not even by our own fault. You can get yourself into, like, embarrassing situations sometimes. It's just gonna happen. Do we have the tools to deal with those things? And I think the author is right, or the psychologists that the author quoted are right. There's going to be a lot of psychological issues with this because people have not been dealing with these things. There's going to be self-loathing, anxiety, and, like, manifestations of despair. And so there's going to be problems because people don't know how to deal with their, like, emotions at this point. Things are changing in the world, and it's hard. And so denying that, like, shame is going to, like, denying people their shame, it's going to be a problem. Now, like I said, I thought it was a it was a philosophical failing on the author's part that they were not able to come up with a the parallel to justice, that where empathy turns into justice, where they're not the same thing, that we should have some sort of institutionalized social practice that, shame has grown into, like, okay, reflection on our history or something, like, a history museum maybe, or I was saying memorials to, like, the war dead or something like that. People have given their life for this country so that others may, live. So things like that, maybe that would be something there. I thought that was a philosophical failing on the piece here, but again, that was not their focus. This is a character education piece, not a theory of, not necessarily just a theory of shame piece. Like if they were just doing a virtue ethics paper on shame, in theory, this is had more direction. So it's really not a this is a metaphysical knock on my part, but that was not the focus of the paper. Okay, I am now losing my voice. Does anyone else have anything else to say?